Hey guys, this is part 2 of the Stephen Hawking Hyperrealism picture, and this right here is the finished product. And in this video I will show you how I got to this stage, but before I do that there are a couple things that I should tell you about so you understand what exactly I'm doing in the video. So to start off with, I'm going to tell you about form, and form can be defined as the three-dimensionality of the object, and it is composed of three different things, which are hue, value, and saturation. And I'll start with value. Value is basically the different shades of the color. So this right here is the value for a black and white scale, and what that consists of is a base color, and a base color is basically the color that exists if there was no light or shadow. And this is the brightest highlight, which is the area of maximum light, and this is the darkest shadow. And I should say that in reality, nothing will actually reach absolute white or absolute black. So it will only seem like that in reference pictures, but in reality that actually won't happen. And these right here in between are the light midtones, and these right here are the dark midtones. And when you put them all together in when constructing an object, that's how you create three-dimensionality. And on the bottom right here, or before I get to the bottom, I should tell you about the other one, which is the other two, which is hue and saturation. And what I'll do next is hue. And hue is basically any color, like out of the entire spectrum. It's any color that you wish to use. It's this entire thing. Hue is color. And third one is saturation. I don't know why I closed it. Saturation is basically the intensity of the color. So if I was to use this color picker as an example, and this right here is the center, the color that I want to choose. As I move to the left, I'm desaturating it, and what I mean by desaturation is moving it closer to gray. So the more I remove the color, the more gray it gets, and that's called decreasing the saturation. And the more I add the color, the more I'm increasing the saturation. So that's what saturation is, and it doesn't play that much of a role in creating a three-dimensional object. That just adds more character to the object that you're creating. And so back to this the bottom scale right here. This is another value scale which I created using human skin tones. And a fun fact about this scale right here, this very scale can be used to create skin tones of basically any race. So in this particular tone, I chose this as the base color, which would be, I guess, the base color of a very tan Caucasian individual or a very fair brown individual. But if you want to create the base color for any other race, all you have to do is just move up or down this value scale, and depending on the race of the person, the base color will either be lighter or darker in this very value scale. And this right here would be the brightest highlight, and this right here would be the darkest shadow. And above right here, what you see is the blush scale. And what do I mean by blush? I mean the area of the skin which has blood closest to the surface. Now, you all may know that skin is actually a transparent organ, and the tint that you see is a combination of the underlying fat and the underlying blood, and depending on where the ratio of how much fat as opposed to how much blood there is in certain areas, you either get more of a yellow tint or more of a pinkish tint, and the pinkish tint is what you would call blush, and the blush also has its own value scale. And so, moving on, I pulled up this Google image right here of a face, and what this is right here is the different facial planes. So if you took a face and you got rid of all the soft edges and turned the soft edges into flat edges, I should say, this is kind of what you would get. And before I continue this explanation, I should also tell you that a very, very important thing if you're using a reference picture is to pay attention to where the light source is coming from, or if you're just constructing a picture out of imagination, to keep in mind where you want the light source to be. So in this particular picture, the light source is coming from directly in front and above the individual, so possibly right about here, but in front. And what's happening is the light is hitting the object directly here. Now I know you're probably thinking that the light is hitting directly here, but it's not. The reason this part is brighter is because this is the part that reflects off the object and goes directly into your eye. The angle of the bounce light. That's why this part appears brighter, but this is not actually the part where light strikes the object directly. That would be somewhere over here, because if the light source was coming from here. And so you have all these different facial planes, which is responsible for creating the highlights and the shadows. So you can see this brow ridge right here, the underside of this is hiding from the light, which is why this is in a shadow. The same reason this is in a shadow, the same reason this part right here is in a shadow. But the part that faces the light, like right here, 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 they'll be lighter. And this is basically the construction of, this is basically how you would create shadows on a human face. And another thing to keep in mind are something called cast shadows. These shadows are created because they're directly away from the light. A cast shadow is something slightly different. So suppose the light source was in front but at this angle as opposed to straight above, and the light is coming this way. What you have here is the nose, and the nose creates a shadow directly on the face because the light source is right here. So that would create a shadow in this area, and that is what is called a cast shadow. And the final thing I will show you is the sphere that I constructed right here, which is just to further emphasize the point. So here is the light source that I created. So the light source is hitting somewhere right about here, but the reason this part is brighter is because this is the part where the light bounces off the object to reach your eye. And here is the cast shadow. And this is a fairly poorly constructed sphere, but it's a sphere. You can kind of sense the three-dimensionality of the object. But there is one other concept that you should know about if you want to go into more realistic type of drawing, which is the very property of light itself. And the property of light is that it is pretty much omnipresent. It moves in all directions. It bounces off many different objects, and it will eventually find its way back to the same object from a completely different angle. So in this case, let's say this light source right here bounced off many different objects, somehow came this way, hit the ground right here, and it bounces again in all different kinds of angles. And one of the angles is back at the object from this side. So what you would create in that case is something called a bounce light. So the bounce light would create a highlight but not exactly a highlight. This would be one of the midtones, because this light is not as strong as the light coming from this side. So this light would actually be slightly dimmer than the light over here. I'm not picking a dimmer color, I'm just showing you where the bounce light would be to emphasize the fact. So that's what's called a bounce light. And if you actually look at pictures or real life references, you will see that there are multiple light sources most of the time. Like, obviously you have the main light and the bounce light, but then sometimes you might have what's called a backlight, which is a light of a completely different origin and color. So suppose there's a different light source coming from this way, like that. So what would happen in this case is, once again, you would have, it has to be much lighter than that, sorry. I'll desaturate it, make it a little lighter. So this part would be lit up as such, like that. And that's what's called a secondary light source. And like I said before, in many of real life reference pictures, you can have 2 light sources, 3 light sources, as many light sources, to the point where the object is almost completely lit up, and there's very little area for shadows to exist. But nonetheless, shadows will find a way to exist. And so now I will move on to showing you how I finished the Stephen Hawking Hyperrealism picture. Alright, so here you can see I started from the finished sketch from the previous video, and what I'm doing right now is I'm creating a color palette. And what that means is, if you remember from just a little bit earlier, the skin tone value scale, which I was talking about earlier, that's pretty much exactly what I created, only instead of picking my own colors, I chose them directly from the reference picture to get a more accurate color base. And what I'm doing now is I'm just blocking in the basic colors and getting a rough idea of where the light source is, and just blocking in where the shadows and highlights should go, so that when I zoom in, I can start the rendering and creating a more 3D feel. And this is the point where I no longer need the outline. And there are a couple other things I want to talk about, and one of those things includes doing a color study. And what I mean is, if you are creating a picture based off of another reference picture, you should really focus, you should really just spend a decent chunk of time on really figuring out what colors are in the pictures and what the values of those different colors are, or if the picture's in black and white, just figuring out the values that are present in that picture. Just look at the picture, figure out exactly what you will be needing to construct the picture, and that will make your job a lot easier. And as you can see, when it comes to digital painting, that job is much easier, because doing the color study doesn't take more than just a few minutes. Like, all I did was I just created a color palette for the skin tones, a different color palette for the lips, a different color palette for the clothes, and one more for the hair. I just created 4 different color palettes, and I just selected 1 or 2 to 3 different colors for each one. And all I'm doing is referring back to the color palette to create the picture and render it. But if you're using other media, such as, just paper and pencil, it might be a little harder to do that, especially if you're using lead pencil, because they don't really get that dark, so you might need charcoal or whatever to get the correct value which you're looking for in the picture. And the same goes for acrylic painting or oil painting. If you're doing those, before you even start painting on the canvas, you might want to just get a paper plate or something like that, and just practice mixing the colors so that you know exactly how to create the colors when you actually start painting it, so you don't waste time trying to figure out when you already started, and so you have that other complication of the paint drying before you figure out what you're doing. So that's what I mean by color study, and it's always worth it to do a color study before you actually get started on the picture. And I guess that is all I have to talk about for now, but there is one other point I want to stress on later in this video, and I will get to that when we reach that point of the video. So for now, just enjoy.
So easy. I knew how you were from the beginning. Play with fire, now I'm burned, slipped and fell, I'm hurt, but I ain't looking for you to save me. No need for apologies. They don't mean a thing to me. You're caught and I'm calling you out. I'm on to it now, and there's nothing more for me to do. Let's say my piece and cut you. I ain't about to be your fool.
And this right here is the second thing that I wanted to talk about. Like, this portion of the video, I put it in real time just to kind of give you guys an idea of the difficulty level of getting the accuracy which is required if you're trying to do something hyper realistic. As you can see, like, many times I started and then I would just erase it and start over, and it's a very tedious and long process, but then if you're trying to get the accuracy, it's something you have to do, and if you do it right, the end product is always worth the effort. And that's all I have to say. Enjoy the rest of the video, and happy travel.
Once you get done, you won't care. The whole time I was seeing warning signs, but my heart closed my eyes, and that's why you could get me tangled in your mess. Make me one of two, just for now, substitute until you move. Did wrong. No need for apologies. They don't mean a thing to me. You're caught and I'm calling you out. I'm on to it now, and there's nothing more for me to do. Let's say my piece and cut you loose.